emporium chain Mydin. He's also the president of the Bumiputra Retailers Organization. Good evening, Datuk Anam. Most of the over 150 premises that were flagged by the Hyde system, they've now been shut down, shutdown operations after they were issued last-minute orders on Saturday night. And I believe Mydin Shah Alam was one of these premises. So why do you consider the actions that were taken based on the predictive Hyde system to be unfair? Maybe you can share your thoughts.
Actually, we, the retailers, I mean, not only Mydin, for that matter, all retailers are very supportive of the government using science and data and analysis to ensure that we can break the COVID chain. I think we don't have an issue with that. I think the more challenge or the issue here is that the government, as always, normally does not consult the stakeholders first before making an announcement. So we are caught by surprise. We really do not know how the data is arrived at. Why were these malls identified and to be closed down? One immediate flaw that comes to our mind, obviously, is that we were told, of course, that high-risk patrons have visited your malls. So your mall becomes high risk, so you are flagged out. But remember, the way it works is that a customer walks into a mall, they scan the MySejahtera, then they show to our security that they have scanned it. After they've scanned it, only we see, they are low risk or high risk. When we see they are high risk, we tell them they are not allowed to go in. But at this moment, they have already scanned their data. So when you take that data itself will be flawed. So more important is that for us to know how the data is accumulated. If the data is being accumulated by, let's say, looking at high risk, low risk, then what we will do now is get the patrons to show us the MySejahtera, show us whether they're low or high. If they're only low, then we let them in, then only they scan. I think the second point is that we're also not clear is how do you say there are preemptive clusters to be formed? Because in a bigger mall, if 500 people high risk go to, say, one Utama, 1 million square feet mall, or say 50 people go to a smaller mall, is it a ratio that's being used? Is it a percentage? How are numbers arrived at? So I think basically retailers are always supportive of the government. We understand the challenges. We have children, we have our wife, we have our grandmother, our parents. We don't want any one of us to get COVID-19. So we need more clarity. I think this is the main thing here.
Ameer, I understand also that the retailers have pointed out to some of the flaws in the data collection that include the fact that people sometimes sign in physically. I mean, they sign a book rather than use the MySejahtera app. And therefore, many premises that where people have a preference for writing in their data isn't part of the system. And that it might lead to a false sense of security. People not going to the malls that have been very diligent about collecting data through the MySejahtera app, and then going to places where, in fact, they're not using that app. I mean, could you help us understand why you think it's important to be clear about those kinds of contradictions in the system?
No, I mean, basically, this is where the flaw lies, because not everybody, although the government says diwajibkan, they must scan the MySejahtera. We know in Malaysia, many people don't carry so-called smartphones, and there are people are also hesitant because of data. They say, I don't want to share my data. So they're allowed to write in. So this is where the flaw comes in, right? So now with this kind of thing coming in, the retailers might say, oh, let me not ask my customers to scan, but write in the book. Then the whole thing will backfire. I think that the main thing is that there's a system here good. We need to be told how will be utilized. And more importantly, I think it's the data that the government should have kept to themselves first, instead of going to the public, keep to themselves, identify those malls, go to the mall and tell them, you know what, you are high risk here. These are the new SOPs you must implement. Otherwise, I'm going to shut you down. But see, once you put on the list, it's not a 3-day shutdown, The mall, people will stop going to the mall for maybe even a month. Because once the name is there, people say, "Oh, this place, I'll be very scared to go." This is a terrible thing to do to any business.
Okay. Dr. Ameer, you said that retailers are supportive of science and data if it means combating the COVID-19 crisis. What do you understand to be the science behind the 3-day shutdown? What are you supposed to do during that time as retailers?
Basically, we've been told, okay, so you are a hotspot, a potential cluster, a preemptive strike here. We are asked to shut down for 3 days. Why 3 days? I have no idea. We are asked to sanitize. But actually, malls are sanitized 3 times a day. The only thing is the shutdown will mean that we do a proper, let's say, 100% sanitization. But seriously, we really don't need 3 days to sanitization. I've done one of my bigger malls, a 1 million square feet, just an overnight 8-hour period. So closing for 3 days is also loss of business.
Dr. Ameer, the other thing that's very interesting about the way government has worked in relation to new scientific evidence is that we know now that it's more the aerosol, the breath of people, and that the coronavirus is carried, airborne rather than mostly on surfaces. And so, in fact, this, and I remember on social media, Professor Adiba Kamruzaman saying, basically calling the cleansing practices a theater, a kind of theater, cosmetic and not real and not following the science. Have you engaged with government about these practices that seem like you're doing something, but actually, when it comes to the science, is largely ineffectual?
Yeah, that this is the problem. When this COVID-19 first started, we did not understand enough. So it's fair enough. You sanitize everything under the sun. But like you just mentioned, we know that now it is a very, very minute transmission avenue. So seriously, we're just wasting money sanitizing it. But since we are asked to told at gunpoint, you do it, otherwise you can't open up your mall, we don't have a choice here. I think more consultation and maybe more clarity is required. I think many countries have stopped doing this.
Okay, so now that the Hyde list was made public on Saturday, there have been a couple of days since. Have you had engagement with government and government ministries, government agencies since then to highlight these issues?
I think, only about half an hour ago, there was an engagement with Mydin, with the retailers and other associations, where they actually explained how Hyde works. We also have mentioned in the same meeting that we think the system could be a little flawed. Let us meet together and we want to, I'm sure it's a good system. We have nothing against the system. It's a good system. We must use it. I'm sure Bandagara and Ministry of Health has looked into it. We might need to fine-tune it and make it a better system. We are all supportive. In any case, currently, shutting down is one story. We already have an MCO starting from the 12th. So, well, I guess there are other things that we have to do now to ensure that this COVID-19 chain is broken.
Right. You're a businessman, and just very quick question for you. What kind of damage are these MCOs? And I remember only recently the Prime Minister promising not to have these omnibus, blunderbuster type lockdowns, and it would always be and only be targeted from that point onwards. And now he's announced something quite different. What kind of damage is it doing to the economy?
I think the government or the Prime Minister doesn't have much of a choice. Malaysians tend not to follow SOPs. I'm really, really sad when the government was flexible, when they allowed F&B to open and to have dine-in, the SOPs were clear. 1 meter social distancing on dining table. 95% of restaurants, F&B outlets never followed this so-called 1 meter social distancing. And this is what you get. And this is really what happens when people don't listen and don't follow SOPs. We had social gatherings, I was the one, actually yesterday I mentioned somewhere to say that let's forget these raya gatherings. Let's stop the social gathering for at least the next 2-3 weeks. And I'm glad the government today announced the so-called lockdown. I mean, you know what? Unfortunate for business, but we have to bite the bullet. We understand.
Dr. Ameer, when you say that people aren't following SOPs, do you mean the public or do you mean retailers like yourselves?
No, I'm saying the public are not following, and also many of the F&B retailers themselves are not following SOPs. They are not. They are not.
Dr. Ameer, I do want to point to. I just want to ask you, in the statement that the retailers organization came out with, they also pointed out that actually factories and work clusters contribute far more to the COVID numbers. But people tend to blame the small businessmen, the F&B outlets, not the big factories that are producing most of the COVID cases. I mean, there seems to be a contradiction here, no?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you say where the numbers are in the construction. The numbers are that side, not on the retail. Retail is only 4.5% or something like that. But still, if the numbers keep increasing, more so with Hari Raya, with social gathering coming in, and interstate, thank God, is not allowed now. I think this is the preemptive strike. We cannot afford to go. We cannot afford to have more higher numbers than what we already have now.
Right. Okay. Dr. Ameer, thank you for your time. We appreciate you joining us on the show tonight, sharing your perspective on the matter. Appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This, but we will be right back with more on this topic. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.
Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada Islam. This is orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita, sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face mask, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. Awani 745 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro.
Hi, thanks so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's continue our discussion about the consequences of using predictive systems to manage this pandemic. Dr. Helmi Zakariah is a panel member of the WHO's Focus Group on Artificial Intelligence for Health, and that focus group works to establish standardized assessment framework for the evaluation of AI-based methods used for health diagnosis, triage, and the treatment decisions. So he's well placed to join us on the show tonight. Dr. Helmi, thank you for being with us this evening. Now, the scientific community has long called for the increased use of tools like data science and AI in the fight against COVID-19. I'm wondering, and we understand the public understands the advantage that it can give us. But because of your work with the WHO focus group, I'm wondering whether you can share with us some of the principles that should be guiding the use of AI forecasting models, particularly for tracking and for predicting future infections and clusters.
Right, sure. Well, thank you again for having me here again. I think in terms of, on your question, in terms of what are the principles, is that there are basically 6 standard area that AI has been applied in the pandemic, right? So the first one is in optimizing your operation. So you can use it to define your forecast, to automate practice slots. You can use it as a patient solution, for example, to detect anomaly for patients undergoing quarantine at home. You can definitely use it for clinical care pathway as well and clinical trials. But I think the very reason we are here today is that AI can also be used for population health, where we can use predictive analytics to determine hotspots, so then we can deploy a targeted community cache. But in order for us to do that, there's basically at least there are 6 principles that have been outlined by the
Dr. Helmi, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I think we're having a little bit of audio disruption, some kind of technical difficulties, and we're going to go take a quick break, but we'll come back and see whether we can resolve some of these audio difficulties. We'll be right back here on Consider This. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.
Ke depan dan maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada support system. This is chain reaction.
Polisi, kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita, sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face masks, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. Awani 740.
You know of the news of the day.
We reframe the news for you every day.
Be bold with us. Weeknights starting 9:45 p.m. only on Astro AWANI.
Ini Bob.
Bob adalah seorang penyelam marin. Setiap hari
Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada seperti this is chain reaction.
Polisi, kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face mask, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan.
Welcome back to Consider This with me, Melisa, Idris and Sharaad Kuttan. We are joined tonight by Dr. Helmi, Zakariah, panel member of the WHO's Focus Group on Artificial Intelligence for Health. Now, Dr. Helmi, I think we've resolved the technical issues. Now, I'm just wondering whether you can go back very quickly. You were about to say that there were 3 principles that should be guiding the use of artificial intelligence when it comes to public health policy. Could you very quickly outline what those 3 principles are?
I guess those principles, first of all, that it needs to be explainable, right? It needs to be explainable. And second one, it needs to be reproducible, and it has a very strong foundation on the subject that is applied to. So in our case, for example, if you come up with a predictive model of outbreak, those models, it doesn't have a strong foundation and assumption of epidemiological link of COVID-19 and its mode of transmission. So it lacks what we call explainability. And when that happens, once we cannot explain it, I suppose we might be wasting resources focusing on the wrong place, or even worse, if we are going to use it for punitive measure, I think that's quite a slippery slope for arbitration of justice.
Well, that's very interesting, and also begs the question, Helmi, about just data collection at all. I mean, we've had a year or so of this pandemic, and still people are filling up these ledgers. Does anybody pick these ledgers up? I mean, is data being inputted somewhere from these ledgers?
Well, and yes, I mean, you're very correct there. So one of the things that we must try to avoid when we build an AI algorithm is the fact that our data must be robust. So if the data set that we use to train the machine learning is not robust, or in this case, for example, right, the very fact that we only process or build the AI model using those data that is collected through a mobile app, it means then we have a blind spot of those people who doesn't have a smartphone, those people who have to register on a book, on the ledger, and this is actually quite an important cohort. For all we know, they are probably like this group of people have a different sort of transmissibility pattern between them. So building a model without having a robust data set will definitely lead to bias.
Right. We spoke to Datuk Ameer Ali Mydin just before we rang you, and he said that he believes the data of the places that was flagged by HIDE, for instance, that type of data used in predictive systems should be kept private, not made public to everyone. And I'm wondering where the principles of AI-based AI methods, what are the principles saying about this? Should data be made publicly available to everyone, or just used for policy making?
Well, I don't think at this point of time the ethics consideration of the application of AI in pandemic have reached that level of maturity. But if we can take a step back, and how it is being applied, though, I think the committee has said that at the very first, what you need to try to avoid is basically bias, right? And so when you look into bias, for example, so if you build the algorithm in such a way that it is skewed to one particular sectors or to one particular demographic, for example, we know the most well-known example of algorithmic bias is the facial recognition technology in the US that identify young black males as criminal suspects, right, in comparison to other demographics. And in our case, if we try to apply it on what we are looking at the moment, I personally don't think that it is a problem that should those places be identified, but it must be done in a fairness. It means like if those places are identified, then all the other places must also have the similar chance and likelihood of it to be identified as to have a higher transmission rate. Because, I mean, if you think about it, right, at the moment you have two scenarios. First, you have a mall that adheres to its SOP, and in turn it requires that everyone to scan the QR code, and therefore we pick up any sort of transmission there. And then on the other hand, you have probably a school or a dormitory, and because of the nature of the premise, it might lack QR code altogether. And there's no data being pipelined from any of these places. So the aftermath is that because of continuous data stream from malls and other premises with good practice, they are more readily identified as emerging hotspots. So the irony is that we basically punish the good player, and it might backfire. So if business and people know that scanning actually disincentivize them, and not scanning might let them off the hook in the first place, I think they would consider why would they need to scan in the first place. Yeah, and I think that is a consideration that we have to put for now.
All right. Dr. Helmi, this is a fascinating topic and we must have you back on to discuss this further. But thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. But before we leave you, let me remind you that you can get all the latest news and information on COVID-19 vaccines at astroawani.com and the Astro AWANI app. Thank you so much for watching the show tonight. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
We'll be back with you same time tomorrow. Till then, good night.